The evening began as a minor key masterpiece of domestic ambition. A still life, carefully composed. A brown paper bag, its contents promising a quiet, deliberate indulgence. A bottle of Merlot, its dark glass cool and heavy in my hand. For the first time in what felt like a geological epoch, I was entirely present. A man returned from a long and arduous journey. The day had been an unexpected gift. The biannual ordeal of parent-teacher conferences, usually a soul-crushing marathon of polite fictions and thinly veiled anxieties, had concluded with an uncharacteristic swiftness. I had an entire afternoon, a pristine, unclaimed territory of time. Sophia, my wife, a woman who, for the last several months, had been a blur of motion, a comet streaking through the shared cosmos of our life. Her career in the high-stakes, high-gloss world of advertising was a demanding deity, and she, its most devoted acolyte. The long hours, the relentless pressure, it was all there, etched in the faint, violet smudges beneath her eyes, in the hurried, distracted cadence of her movements. We both deserved a moment of armistice, a quiet harbor in the storm of our separate ambitions. Tonight, I was determined to be that harbor. I stepped into our house, the familiar scent of old books, lemon polish, and Sophia's faint, floral perfume wrapping around me like a well-worn blanket. The floorboards, a chorus of familiar creaks, seemed to protest my intrusion into the profound, unnatural stillness. The silence was the first discordant note. Normally, our home was a soundscape of Sophia's creation, an eclectic playlist of indie rock, the disembodied voices of her favorite urban legend podcasts, the general, ambient hum of a life being lived. She was the conductor of our domestic symphony. But tonight, the orchestra was silent. I set the bag on the kitchen counter, the cool granite a stark, polished surface. The kitchen was immaculate, gleaming, untouched. Another wrong note. Sophia was not a slob, but she was a woman who lived in her space. There was always evidence of her presence. A half-empty mug of tea, a stack of mail she intended to sort, the lingering ghost of breakfast. Tonight, the room had the sterile, staged quality of a showroom. Sophia? I called, my voice a soft, tentative thing, afraid to shatter the fragile, unsettling quiet. No response. I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over her contact, then decided against it. Her car was in the driveway. She was here. Somewhere. The hallway to the stairs felt elongated, a shadowy tunnel lined with the ghosts of our shared past. Framed photographs, a gallery of our happiest moments, seemed to watch me with a new, unsettling judgment. There we were on a beach in Maui, sun-kissed, and stupidly in love. There we were at a family Christmas, her laughter a silent explosion of joy captured in a single frame. There we were, just last year, at our anniversary dinner, her eyes shining with a light I had once believed was reserved only for me. The joy in those frozen moments felt historical, ancient. I climbed the stairs, each step a deliberate, weighted footfall. My senses were on high alert, an animal sensing a predator in the tall grass. A faint, almost imperceptible sliver of light emanated from the crack beneath our bedroom door. I stopped, my heart executing a painful, stuttering beat. A light on. A detail so mundane, so trivial, yet in the context of the profound silence, it felt ominous. I paused at the top of the stairs, the cool, heavy bottle of wine a talisman in my hand. My mind, a frantic defense attorney, began to present its case. Asterisk, she fell asleep reading. She's decompressing, scrolling through her phone. You are overthinking. You are a fool. Asterisk. And then, a sound. The faintest whisper of a sound, drifting through the closed door. A laugh. Sophia's laugh. But it was not her laugh. Not the full-throated, unrestrained peal of joy that erupted when I told one of my terrible, predictable jokes. Not the warm, conspiratorial chuckle she shared with her sister over the phone. This was a different laugh entirely. It was lighter, softer, a silver bell of a sound, intimate and playful. Flirtatious. I froze, every muscle in my body locking into a state of rigid paralysis. My mind raced, a chaotic scramble to reconcile the irreconcilable. Who was she talking to? Why was she laughing that laugh? My hand, of its own volition, itched to push the door open, to flood the scene with the harsh, unforgiving light of reality. but I restrained myself. Instead, I shifted my weight, leaning just enough to peer through the narrow, vertical gap between the door and its frame. And there she was, a tableau of casual, unguarded intimacy. She was lounging on our bed, a landscape I knew as well as my own body, her legs stretched out, her back propped against a mountain of pillows. She was wearing the lavender silk robe I had given her for our 5th anniversary, the fabric slipping from one shoulder, a detail that was both accidental and, somehow, exquisitely deliberate. Her phone was propped on a pillow in front of her, the camera angled up, framing her in a soft, flattering light. She was entirely absorbed, unaware of my presence, a silent, spectral observer in the hallway of my own home. Her voice, when it came, was a low, velvet murmur. This weekend? Of course. I'd love that. My grip tightened on the bottle of wine, the chilled glass a painful, grounding pressure against my palm. A cold, heavy dread, thick as mud, began to fill my chest. Something was not just wrong. Something was fundamentally, irrevocably, broken. The sliver of light from the bedroom door was a blade, cutting the dark hallway in two. I stood on the precipice, a man caught between the life I thought I had and the one that was being revealed to me in real time. The scene inside was a violation, a quiet, domestic tableau that was somehow more brutal than any act of violence. It was the intimacy of it, the casual, unthinking betrayal, that felt like a physical blow. I leaned closer, my breath held tight in my chest, a voyeur in my own home. I couldn't see his face on the screen, only the shifting patterns of light and shadow, but his voice was a low, confident murmur that carried through the phone's speaker. The words were indistinct, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the easy, familiar cadence of a man who believes he belongs exactly where he is. My pulse was a frantic, roaring drum in my ears. Sophia adjusted her position on the bed, a languid, cat-like movement, tugging the silk robe back over her shoulder. The gesture was small, almost unconscious, yet it felt like a piece of a meticulously staged performance. My mind, still scrambling for a rational explanation, a plausible narrative that did not involve the complete and utter demolition of my world, was beginning to fail. This weekend, of course, she repeated, her voice a purr. I'd love that. The words were a direct hit, a sniper's bullet to the heart of my carefully constructed evening. The wine bottle was a block of ice in my hand, the only solid, real thing in a world that was rapidly dissolving into a nightmarish haze. Who was this man? What weekend? What had my life become? And then, his voice, clear and sharp, sliced through the fog of my confusion. See you soon, babe. Babe, asterisk. The word was a detonation. A small, seemingly insignificant syllable that vaporized every last shred of my denial. It was a key that unlocked a secret room in my marriage, a room I never knew existed, and the contents were monstrous. My stomach revolted, a violent, acidic churn. The air in the hallway seemed to thin, to become unbreathable. My foot moved, an involuntary spasm, a twitch of a muscle, but it was enough. The toe of my shoe nudged the bottom of the door, and the old wood emitted a faint, mournful creak. The sound, though small, was an explosion in the quiet intimacy of the room. Sophia's head snapped up. Her expression was a rapid, horrifying sequence of transformations, from the relaxed, languid pleasure of a woman in her private sanctuary to the wide-eyed, frozen panic of a cornered animal. Our eyes met across the dimly lit space, and in that instant, the comfortable fiction of our marriage was incinerated. She scrambled for the phone, her fingers fumbling, clumsy with guilt, as she swiped at the screen, severing the connection. She clutched the device to her chest, a useless, technological shield. Caleb, she stammered, her voice a thin, reedy thing, trembling with a desperate, unconvincing surprise. I said nothing. I couldn't. The words were a logjam in my throat, a tangled mass of rage, grief, and a disbelief so profound it felt like a physical paralysis. I simply stepped into the doorway, filling the frame, my arms crossed over my chest. I let the silence do the work. I let the sheer, unadulterated weight of my presence, of my knowledge, press down on her. Caleb, I can explain, she began, the words shaky, edged with a nascent, defensive whine. I raised an eyebrow, my own voice, when it finally emerged, a low, dangerously calm rumble. "Oh, please do," I said. "Enlighten me." She faltered, her gaze darting around the room, as if searching for an escape route that did not exist. It's not what you think," she said, the cliché so pathetic, so utterly inadequate to the moment, that it was almost laughable. "Not what I think." I repeated, each word a carefully placed stone. "Sophia, I just watched you, lying in our bed, in a robe I gave you, cooing at another man who called you babe, while you made plans to see him for the weekend. So please, tell me, what exactly am I supposed to think?" The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, a fish gasping for air. He's just a friend," she finally managed to whisper. A laugh, a harsh, ugly, bitter sound, tore from my throat. "A friend? Since when do friends get that laugh, Sophia?" I gestured towards her, my composure beginning to crack. "Since when do you lounge on our bed in a silk robe for a friend?" Her jaw tightened. The panic in her eyes was beginning to be replaced by a flicker of something else. Defiance. "You don't understand." "You're right. I don't," I snapped, the last of my calm facade crumbling into dust. "So why don't you help me understand?" She sat up straighter, pulling the robe around her, a gesture of self-protection. "You've been so distant, Caleb," she said, her voice trembling, but now with a new, accusatory edge. "You're always at work. You're always tired. I've been feeling invisible." Invisible. The word was a profound, bewildering insult. The woman I had spent my day thinking about, planning for, the woman for whom the wine and the dinner and the hope for a quiet, connected evening were intended, was accusing me of not seeing her. And this sordid, secret affair was her solution. "Invisible," I repeated, my voice heavy with a disbelief that was rapidly curdling into contempt. "So your answer to feeling invisible was to go behind my back? To invite another man into our life? Into our bed?" "It wasn't like that," she shot back, her voice rising. "It started as nothing. Just someone to talk to. Someone who noticed me." Her words, her pathetic, self-serving justification, hung in the air between us, a toxic, shimmering haze. "What is it now, Sophia?" I asked finally, my voice as cold and dead as the love I had once felt for her. Because from where I'm standing, it doesn't look like just talking anymore. Her gaze fell. Her fingers tightened around her phone, her knuckles white. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know what it is anymore." The woman on the bed was a stranger, a ghost who had stolen my wife's face and voice. In that moment, staring at her, I realized that the foundation of my life was not just cracked, it was a pile of dust. I turned and walked out of the room. My footsteps were heavy, leaden, on the hardwood floor. Each step was a step away from the life I thought I had, a step into a new, terrifying, unknown territory. The untouched dinner, the unopened wine, they were still on the kitchen counter, artifacts from a different, more naive civilization. "Caleb, please." Her voice, thin and desperate, followed me down the stairs. "Don't leave like this. We need to talk." I did not stop. I did not turn back. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cold, clean night air, pulling the door shut behind me on the sound of her frantic, pleading cries. The night air was a shock to the system, a slap of cold reality against the hot, suffocating atmosphere of the house. My chest was a cage, my heart a frantic bird beating against the bars. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my car keys, the familiar weight of them in my palm, one of the few solid things in a world that had just been rendered fluid and treacherous. I didn't have a destination. I didn't have a plan. There was only a single, overriding imperative, motion. I needed to put distance between myself and that house, between myself and the woman who had just revealed herself to be a stranger. I drove. The streets of Portland, usually a familiar and comforting geography, became a meaningless blur of neon and shadow. Tears, hot and unexpected, stung my eyes. I hadn't cried in years, not since my father's funeral, but now they came unbidden, a torrent of grief and rage and a disbelief so profound it felt like a physical illness. My car, of its own volition, it seemed, found its way to a familiar beacon in the dark. The porch light of Marcus's house, a small, steady glow in the vast, indifferent night. He had been my best friend since the chaotic, formative years of college, a man whose loyalty was as solid and dependable as the ground beneath my feet. If there was a safe harbor in this storm, it was him. I sat in the car for a long, shuddering moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to wrestle the chaos in my mind into some kind of coherent narrative. But there was no coherence. There was only the raw, jagged, undeniable fact of her betrayal. When I finally knocked on his door, he opened it to find a ghost on his porch. My appearance must have been a horror show, because the easy curiosity on his face was instantly replaced by a deep, immediate concern. "Caleb," he said, stepping aside. "What the hell happened? You look like you've just seen the abyss." I stumbled past him into the familiar, comforting clutter of his living room. Max, his golden retriever and a creature of profound and gentle soul, lifted his head from the rug, gave a soft thump of his tail, and then settled back down. The sheer, unadulterated normalcy of the scene was a fresh, painful blow. Marcus sat across from me, his posture a study in patient, focused attention. "Talk to me, man," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor. And so I did. The words came out in a torrent, a jagged, incoherent flood of pain and rage. The wine, the laugh, the robe, the phone call, babe, the excuses. Invisible, I recounted every detail, every nuance, every soul-crushing syllable. Marcus listened, his expression hardening as the story unfolded. When I was done, my throat raw, my hands shaking, he let out a long, slow breath. "Man," he said, his voice a low growl, "I don't even know what to say." "There's nothing to say," I replied, my voice a hollow echo of itself. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "No, there is," he said, his tone sharpening. "There's this. You need to be smart, Caleb. You cannot let her control this narrative. She will try. She will twist this. Make it about your distance, about her loneliness, about anything and everything but the simple, ugly fact of what she did. Do not let her." His words cut through the fog of my emotional chaos. He was right. I was in a state of shock, but Sophia, I knew, would already be in a state of strategic calculation. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know," I whispered. Confrontation? Closure? Annihilation? The concepts were too abstract. All I felt was a vast, yawning emptiness. "Not tonight," he said, his voice firm. "Tonight, you stay here. You breathe. You try to get your feet back under you. Tomorrow, you go back. And you don't go back to fight. You go back to get the truth. The whole truth. No more excuses. No more lies." He looked at me, his gaze direct and unwavering. "You deserve the truth, Caleb. No matter how ugly it is." Deserve. Asterisk, the word was a foreign concept. For years, my life had been about providing, about supporting, about putting her needs, her ambitions, her happiness first. The idea that I, myself, was deserving of something, of honesty, of respect, felt like a radical, revolutionary idea. I stayed on his couch that night, staring at the unfamiliar patterns of shadow on his ceiling, the war in my mind raging on. Her words, her laugh, his voice, they were a relentless, tormenting chorus. How had it come to this? How had the woman I had built a life with become so adept at its demolition? The irony of her accusation was a bitter pill. She had felt invisible. In that single, brutal evening, it was I who had been erased. The next morning, I returned to the house. It was no longer a home. It was a territory to be navigated, a space contaminated by betrayal. The drive back was a journey through a landscape of dread. Every street, every landmark, was a reminder of the life that had been a lie. The house was silent when I entered, a different kind of silence than the one that had greeted me the night before. This was not an empty silence. It was a heavy, charged one, thick with unspoken words and the toxic residue of deceit. Sophia was in the kitchen, a mug of coffee in her hands, her posture a study in fragile, defensive tension. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red-rimmed and wary. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice a small, tentative thing. "That depends," I said, my own voice a cold, unfamiliar instrument. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms, creating a physical and emotional barricade between us. "Are we going to be talking about the truth this time? Or are we going to be talking about your carefully constructed fictions?" A flush of color rose in her cheeks. "I've told you," she began. Stop lying to me, Sophia. I cut her off, the words sharp as broken glass. Stop. I deserve better than that. If you can't be honest, then this conversation is over. She flinched, then her gaze fell to the floor. The silence stretched, a tense, humming wire. Finally, she took a shaky breath. You're right, she whispered, her eyes still fixed on the floorboards. I haven't told you everything. The admission, though expected, was another blow. Then start talking. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. The story came out in a series of halting, painful confessions. It had started months ago. A conference in Seattle. A networking event, just like the one she dragged me to. He was charming. He was attentive. It felt harmless. Seattle? I interrupted, my mind racing back. The weekend you said you had that huge client pitch? She nodded, a small, guilty gesture. I didn't tell you I met someone because I knew you'd overreact. At the time, it was nothing. And when did it become something? I pressed, my voice devoid of emotion. I don't know, she whispered, the words a familiar, cowardly refrain. We started texting. It felt good. To be noticed. To feel seen. Seen. Asterisk, there was that word again. A dagger she wielded with an almost surgical precision. As if I had spent the last decade looking straight through her. When did it stop being innocent, Sophia? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Maybe when I started looking forward to his texts more than I looked forward to you coming home, she admitted, her voice cracking. Or maybe when I started making excuses to see him. She finally looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. It didn't just happen, Caleb. I let it happen. You didn't just let it happen. I corrected her, my voice laced with a bitterness I couldn't conceal. You cultivated it. You nurtured it. You made choices. You booked hotel rooms. You called him babe. These are not passive events, Sophia. These are actions. Her shoulders slumped. I don't expect you to forgive me. I need you to understand how lonely I've been. You're so wrapped up in your work, so steady. I felt like I was suffocating. I shook my head, a slow, deliberate motion. So this is my fault, I said, the words a flat, dead thing. You're blaming your affair on me. No, she cried, her voice cracking. I'm not blaming you. I'm just explaining. The distinction was meaningless. Her explanation was a self-serving narrative designed to mitigate her own guilt. Who is he? I demanded, the question I had been avoiding, the one that would give a name and a face to the phantom who had destroyed my life. Her eyes widened. She took a step back. Caleb. Who is he? I repeated, my voice a low, insistent growl. She hesitated, then the name came out, a barely audible whisper. Ryan. Ryan. A simple, common name. And yet, it now held the weight of my entire world's destruction. And where is Ryan now? I asked, my tone dripping with a contempt I no longer tried to hide. She did not answer. She didn't have to. The silence was its own confession. The truth was out, but it was a fractured, incomplete thing. And I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the granite countertop beneath my hands, that there was still more she wasn't telling me. The confession hung in the air, a toxic, shimmering cloud. The name, Ryan was a foreign object in the familiar landscape of our kitchen, a name that now represented the complete and utter demolition of my life. I was still processing the timeline, the year of deceit, when the doorbell rang. The sound was a violent, percussive intrusion, shattering the fragile, terrible intimacy of the moment. Sophia froze, her eyes widening in a new, more profound kind of panic. It was a reaction so immediate, so visceral, that it was a confession in itself. She looked at the door, then back at me, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated dread. Are you expecting someone? I asked, my voice a low, dangerous murmur. No, she said, the lie so quick, so reflexive, it was almost impressive. She took a step towards me, her hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. Caleb, wait. Don't. But I was already moving. I ignored her, striding to the door, my own dread a cold, heavy stone in my gut. I gripped the doorknob, a sense of grim, terrible inevitability washing over me. When I pulled the door open, the man on my porch was the physical embodiment of my personal apocalypse. He was tall, handsome in that generic, billboard ad kind of way, and he radiated a confidence so profound it was almost an act of aggression. He looked me directly in the eye, a small, smug, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Caleb, I assume," he said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. "Who the hell are you?" I asked, though I already knew. He extended a hand, a gesture of such breathtaking arrogance that it momentarily stunned me into inaction. "I'm Ryan." Ryan, asterisk the name, the face, the smug satisfaction. It all coalesced into a single, unbearable reality. He was real. And he was standing on my porch. I glanced over my shoulder. Sophia was a statue of terror in the hallway. "Ryan," I repeated, the name tasting like poison. I turned back to him, my gaze a weapon. "What are you doing here?" "Came to clear the air," he said, taking a step forward, crossing the threshold of my home as if he had been invited. Figured it was time we all got on the same page. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of the man was a force of nature. I moved to block his path, my body a physical barrier. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice a low, vibrating growl. "Ryan, you shouldn't be here." Sophia's voice was a thin, desperate squeak from behind me. He glanced at her, then back at me, his smirk widening. "I think Caleb deserves the full story, don't you, Soph?" I turned to Sophia, my eyes narrowing. "What is he talking about? What haven't you told me?" "Caleb, please," she begged. "This isn't the place." "Oh, it's exactly the place," Ryan interrupted, his voice dripping with a casual cruelty. "Because I'm about to make it crystal clear. Say what you came to say or get out." I snarled, my patience atomized. He raised an eyebrow, the picture of nonchalant confidence. "Fine," he said, leaning against my doorframe as if he were a welcome guest. "Did she tell you about the baby?" The words were a foreign language. They did not compute. "Baby," I turned to Sophia. She gasped, a small, strangled sound, her hand flying to her mouth. "Ryan," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. I stared at her, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. "What is he talking about, Sophia?" "The baby." She did not answer. She could not. Her silence, her tear-filled, terrified eyes, was the answer. I turned back to Ryan, who looked as pleased with himself as a cat with a canary. "That's right," he said, his tone conversational. "Sophia's pregnant. And it's mine." The world did not just tilt, it inverted. The floor fell away, the ceiling rushed down, the very air in my lungs turned to poison. My hand gripped the doorframe. The solid was the only thing tethering me to a reality that was rapidly disintegrating. I looked at Sophia, at this stranger who was my wife, at the living, breathing embodiment of her ultimate betrayal. "Is this true?" I asked, my voice a ragged, unrecognizable whisper. "Is he telling the truth?" She took a hesitant step towards me, tears streaming down her face. "Caleb, I was going to tell you. I didn't know how." "You didn't know how?" I repeated, the words a strangled, broken sound. "So you thought it would be better for me to hear it from him?" I jabbed a finger at Ryan, this smirking, self-satisfied architect of my ruin. "Caleb, I'm sorry," she sobbed. "Stop saying that." I roared, slamming my fist against the doorframe, a jolt of white-hot pain shooting up my arm. "You don't get to be sorry. You made these choices. You did this." Ryan let out a low whistle. "Well, this is getting a little intense. Maybe I should." "You should leave," I snarled. "Now." He held up his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. All right. He stepped back onto the porch, pausing to shoot a final, parting smirk at Sophia. "Call me later, babe." Before he could take another step, I slammed the door shut, the sound a violent, echoing crack in the sudden, terrible silence of the house. I turned to Sophia, my body trembling with a rage so profound it was almost silent. "How long?" I demanded. "What?" she whispered. "How long have you been lying to me about this?" I asked, my voice as cold and dead as my heart. She looked down, her shoulders slumping. "Almost a year. A year. A year of my life, a year of our marriage, a year of our family, had been a lie. An elaborate, intricate, and monstrous lie." I looked at the woman standing before me, this stranger weeping in the wreckage she had created, and I felt nothing. No love, no pity, only a vast, cold, and empty space where my heart used to be. Without another word, I turned and walked out the door, slamming it behind me on her desperate, meaningless cries. The act of walking out of my own front door was a severing, a violent, self-inflicted amputation from the life I had known. The crisp Portland air was a shock to the system, a sudden, cold immersion after the suffocating, toxic atmosphere of the house. My chest was a vice, squeezing the air from my lungs, my mind a chaotic, screaming vortex of betrayal and disbelief. A year. Asterisk a baby. The words were not just facts, they were weapons, and they had been used to eviscerate me. Ryan's smug, triumphant face was seared onto the inside of my eyelids. The sound of Sophia's final, pathetic sob was a ringing in my ears. I walked. I didn't know where I was going. My feet moved with a frantic, desperate energy, as if I could outrun the catastrophe that had just detonated in my living room. I ended up, as if by some grim, homing instinct, at the park, a place that was once a backdrop for happy, ordinary family memories. Now, it was a desolate, twilight landscape of my own personal Gethsemane. I sank onto a bench, my head in my hands, and tried to breathe. How does a person process a betrayal of this magnitude? It wasn't just the infidelity. It was the intricacy of the lie, the duration, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it all. For nearly a year, I had been living in a meticulously constructed fiction, a Truman Show of a marriage where I was the only unwitting star. Every shared meal, every goodnight kiss, every I love you was now retroactively poisoned, transformed into a scene from a grotesque, tragic farce. I felt like a fool. A blind, trusting, stupid fool. The signs had been there, a constellation of red flags I had willfully ignored. The late nights, the emotional distance, the vague, unsatisfactory answers. I had rationalized it all, because the alternative, that the woman I had built my life with was capable of such profound deceit, was simply unthinkable. And the baby, that was the final, brutal twist of the knife. A child, a life, a permanent, living testament to her betrayal, a biological link between my wife and her lover that would exist forever. The thought was a physical nausea, a violent, acidic churning in the pit of my stomach. After an eternity spent on that park bench, a solitary figure in the gathering dark, I called Marcus. His voice, calm and steady, was an anchor in the storm. "Come here," he said, no questions asked. Now, at his house, the story spilled out of me again, this new, more horrific chapter. He listened, his own face a mask of disbelief and a quiet, simmering rage on my behalf. That's not just betrayal, Caleb," he said, his voice a low growl. "That's a special kind of evil." "I don't know what to do, Marcus," I whispered, the fight, the anger, finally draining out of me, leaving behind a vast, hollow emptiness. "I don't know how to come back from this." "You don't come back from it," he said, his voice firm. "You go through it, and you start by protecting yourself." He was right. The grieving would come later. First, there was the grim, necessary business of survival. The next morning, sitting at Marcus's kitchen table, the words that had been unthinkable just 48 hours prior now felt like the only sane, logical conclusion. "I'm going to file for divorce," I said, and the words, though heavy, brought with them a sliver of relief. I called the lawyer, Alan, a man whose no-nonsense demeanor was exactly what I needed. When I recounted the latest developments, the year-long affair, the pregnancy, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Well," he said finally, his voice a dry, clinical instrument. "That certainly clarifies things. The evidence I had, the recording of her initial confession, the text messages I had found on her phone, all of it was now amplified, thrown into stark, damning relief by this final revelation." Alan was swift and ruthless. The divorce papers were drawn up, a legal document that would formally sever the tangled, cancerous mess of my marriage. When Sophia was served, her only response was a single, pleading voicemail, a message I deleted without listening. We communicated only through our lawyers after that. She did not fight. There was no fight left in her. She agreed to everything. An unequal division of assets in my favor, a complete relinquishment of her claim on our home, a signed admission of her infidelity. It was not a negotiation, it was a surrender. The final meeting was a surreal, out-of-body experience. We sat across from each other in a cold, impersonal conference room, two strangers who had once promised to love each other forever. She looked diminished. The vibrant, confident woman I had married was gone, replaced by a pale, tired ghost. "Caleb," she said, as I was leaving. I paused, my back to her. "I'm sorry." I did not answer. I did not turn around. I simply walked out of the room, out of the building, and into the first day of my new, uncertain, and solitary life. I moved out of the house. I couldn't stay there, in that museum of a life that had been a lie. I found a small, Spartan apartment on the other side of town, a blank canvas on which I could, eventually, begin to paint a new picture. Work became my sanctuary. The ancient, epic tragedies of history were a strange comfort, a reminder that my own personal drama was but a small, insignificant footnote in the long, bloody story of human folly. Marcus was a constant, a steady presence in a world that had lost its moorings. He would show up at my apartment with beer and pizza, and we would sit in a comfortable, masculine silence, the unspoken understanding between us a more potent form of communication than any words. One night, he studied me, a shrewd, analytical look in his eyes. "You're not carrying it anymore," he said. "Carrying what?" "The anger," he said. "The weight of it. It's not hanging on you like a shroud anymore." He was right. The rage, the grief, the profound, soul-crushing weight of her betrayal. It was still there, a part of my internal landscape. But it no longer defined me. It was a scar, a permanent reminder of the wound, but the wound itself was no longer bleeding. The first few months of my new life were an exercise in deliberate, painstaking reconstruction. My apartment, initially a sterile, empty box, slowly began to feel like a home. I filled the bare walls not with new things, but with old parts of myself I had forgotten. Framed photographs from a backpacking trip through Europe I'd taken in my 20s. A bookshelf filled with the worn, dog-eared novels I had loved before my life became a shared narrative. I picked up my old guitar, my fingers clumsy on the frets, and slowly, the calluses and the chords began to return. I was not just rebuilding a life. I was excavating a self. The Caleb, who had been a husband, a partner, was gone. I was reacquainting myself with the Caleb who existed before him, the man who loved long, solitary hikes in the deep green of the Oregon forests, the man who found a quiet, meditative solace in the darkroom, watching images emerge from the chemical bath. Work remained my anchor, the steady, predictable rhythm of the academic year, a comforting structure in a life that had been rendered structureless. My students, with their vibrant, chaotic energy and their blessedly self-absorbed dramas, were an unwitting form of therapy. They demanded my presence, my focus, pulling me out of the recursive, navel-gazing loops of my own grief. Marcus was my constant. He was the one who would drag me out of my solitary sanctuary for a beer, who would listen to the same, tired stories of my anger and my sadness without a hint of impatience. His friendship was a testament to the fact that not all bonds were fragile, that loyalty was not a mythical concept. I believed I had settled into a new, quiet, and solitary normal. I had accepted my fate as a man who would, for the foreseeable future, be alone. And then, one evening, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, the woman standing in my hallway was a complete stranger. She was in her early 30s, with kind, intelligent eyes and a quiet, nervous energy. "Hi," she said, her voice a little shaky. "You don't know me." "My name is Claire. I was Ryan's wife." The name, *Ryan*, was a jolt, an electric shock that sent a tremor through my carefully constructed piece. My hand tightened on the doorknob. My first instinct was to slam the door in her face, to protect my hard-won sanctuary from any further contamination from that toxic world. But there was a raw, undisguised vulnerability in her eyes that stopped me. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. She flinched, then took a steadying breath. "I found out," she said. "About everything. About your wife. About the baby. I left him." She paused, her gaze dropping to the floor. I thought you deserved to know. And I wanted to say that I am so sorry. For what he did. For what you've been through." Her apology was so unexpected, so profoundly decent, that it disarmed me completely. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice softening. "Because I know how lonely it is," she said, her eyes meeting mine, and in their depths, I saw a reflection of my own pain. "And I didn't want you to feel like you were the only one." She fumbled in her pocket, and pulled out a small business card. If you ever want to talk to someone who gets it. I took the card, and then, to my own surprise, I heard myself say, "Come in." We sat at my small kitchen table, two strangers united by the wreckage of a single, selfish man. She told me her story, and it was a haunting, familiar echo of my own. The lies, the gaslighting, the slow, insidious erosion of trust. As she spoke, a strange and unexpected thing happened. The weight I had been carrying, the shame, the feeling of being a unique and singular fool, began to lift. I was not alone. Talking to Claire was not a romantic encounter. It was something far more profound. It was an act of shared humanity, a quiet, empathetic bearing of witness to each other's pain. By the time she left, the air in my apartment felt lighter. Her visit had been a strange, unexpected gift, a reminder that healing often comes from the most unlikely of sources. A year after the day my world had imploded, I stood on the small balcony of my apartment, looking out at the Portland skyline. The city lights were a glittering, indifferent tapestry below. The air was crisp, clean, and filled with the promise of autumn. Sophia was a distant, faded photograph in the album of my past. The anger was gone, replaced by a quiet, weary indifference. The scars were still there, a part of my history, but they no longer ached. They were simply a part of the man I had become. I had built a new life, a quieter, smaller, but infinitely more honest one. A life filled with the things that truly mattered. The quiet satisfaction of my work, the steadfast loyalty of a true friend, the profound, all-consuming love for the history that was my own. The future was no longer a terrifying void. It was a blank canvas. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt ready to pick up a brush and begin to paint again. I had not just survived. I had, against all odds, begun to live.